At my 70th birthday dinner, I was going to announce my son as the new CEO. Before I could speak, my drunk daughter-in-law toasted, "To my bald father-in-law, today I understand why my mother-in-law left." My son nodded, but when I slid an envelope across the table. "Panic, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined my 70th birthday would be the night I finally understood what it meant to be invisible in my own family. The dining room at Meridian Club looked perfect, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, white roses arranged just how my late wife Margaret would have liked them. I had spent weeks planning this dinner, not for the celebration, but for the announcement that would secure our family's future. Sitting at the head of the mahogany table, I watched my son David adjust his tie for the third time. At 42, he still carried that nervous energy from his childhood, the same restless fidgeting that used to drive Margaret crazy during Sunday dinners. Tonight was supposed to be his night. I was going to announce him as the new CEO of Whitmore Industries, the company I had built from nothing over 35 years. "Dad, you look handsome tonight," David said, though his eyes kept darting toward his wife. Heather sat beside him in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her third glass of wine, maybe fourth. I had stopped counting after the second bottle appeared. "Thank you, son." I reached for my water glass, my hands steadier than they had been in months. The doctor said the tremor was just age, nothing serious, but Heather always made sure to point it out whenever I reached for anything. Tonight my hands were perfectly still. The waiter brought our main courses, prime rib for David, salmon for Heather, and the herb-crusted chicken I had specifically requested. Margaret always said I was too predictable with my food choices, but some things about a man never change. I was about to raise my glass to begin the toast when Heather stood up, swaying slightly. Wait, she giggled, her voice carrying that particular pitch it reached when she had too much wine. "Before Michael makes whatever boring speech he's been practicing all week, I want to say something." David's face flushed. "Honey, maybe we should let Dad—" No, this is important." Heather raised her glass, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The few other diners in the restaurant turned their heads toward our table. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar knot of dread that had become my constant companion whenever Heather opened her mouth in public. She cleared her throat dramatically. "To my dear father-in-law, happy birthday to our bald eagle." The words hit me like a physical blow. I watched David's face, waiting for him to correct her, to defend, me to show even a flicker of embarrassment. Instead, he looked down at his plate. But Heather wasn't finished. "You know, Michael, today I finally understand why Margaret left you all those years ago." The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the soft classical music seemed to fade into nothing. I mean, who could blame her for wanting to escape this boring, controlling old man? My wife hadn't left me. Margaret had died of cancer 6 years ago, and Heather knew it. She had been at the funeral, had seen me break down at the graveside, had watched me struggle through the darkest year of my life. But she stood there, smiling that cruel smile, waiting for my reaction. "Heather." My voice came out steady, calmer than I felt. "Margaret didn't leave me. She passed away, and you know that." She waved her hand dismissively. "Same difference. She escaped, didn't she?" Then she turned to David, with a conspiratorial whisper that everyone could hear. "Honey, promise me you'll never become as pathetic as your father." David nodded. He actually nodded. I set my fork down carefully, my appetite completely gone. Around us, other diners pretended to focus on their meals, but I could feel their eyes, their pity, their second-hand embarrassment for the old man being humiliated by his own family. The waiter approached hesitantly, probably wondering if he should intervene, but I waved him away. "Are you finished?" I asked Heather, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, come on, Michael, can't you take a joke? You're so sensitive." She plopped back into her chair, already reaching for the wine bottle again. That's when I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The paper felt heavy in my hands, weighted with more than just documents. I placed it on the table between the roses and the flickering candles, right where everyone could see it. Actually, Heather, I think you're the one who's finished. David looked up for the first time since his wife's performance began. Dad, what's that? I pushed the envelope slowly across the table toward them, watching as Heather's wine-flushed confidence began to waver, her eyes fixed on the envelope like it was a snake coiled to strike. Open it, I said simply. The restaurant around us seemed to hold its breath. David reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. But for the first time in 6 years, since Margaret's death, since I had become a stranger in my own family, I felt completely in control. As David's fingers touched the envelope's edge, I realized this wasn't just about tonight's humiliation or even Heather's cruelty. This was about something much bigger. Something that had been building for months, something that would either destroy what was left of my family or finally set me free. The envelope sat on the table like an accusation, but my mind drifted back to when it all began. 3 years ago, when I still believed Heather could change, when I still thought David would find his backbone. I should have seen the signs earlier. Margaret always said I was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people even when they showed me exactly who they were. It started small, the way poison always does. Little comments during family dinners, suggestions that maybe I was getting too old to handle the stress of running Whitmore Industries. Michael looks so tired lately, Heather would say to David, making sure I could hear every word. Don't you think he should slow down? Enjoy his retirement? I wasn't ready to retire. At 67, I was sharper than men half my age, still pulling 14-hour days, still closing deals that kept our 120 employees fed and housed. But Heather planted seeds of doubt in David's mind with surgical precision, and my son, God help him, was fertile ground for her manipulation. The first real blow came during Christmas dinner 2 years ago. Margaret had been gone 4 years by then, and I was finally starting to feel human again. I had invited David and Heather to the house, the same house where David had grown up, where Margaret and I had built our life together. I spent all day cooking Margaret's recipes: honey-glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, the green bean dish that David loved as a child. This is so much food for just 3 people, Heather said, picking at her plate like the meal was beneath her. Maybe next year we should just go to a restaurant, save you all this work, Michael. David nodded along. Yeah, Dad, you don't need to go through all this trouble. Trouble. Margaret's Christmas dinner had become trouble. The traditions we had built over 25 years of marriage, the recipes she had perfected, the memories we had created in that kitchen, all of it reduced to trouble in David's mind because his wife couldn't be bothered to appreciate the effort. I enjoy cooking, I told them, trying to keep my voice level. Your mother and I used to— Your mother is dead, Heather interrupted, not even looking up from her phone. Maybe it's time to stop living in the past. David said nothing. Not one word in defense of his mother's memory or his father's feelings. He just kept eating, eyes fixed on his plate, shoulders hunched like a scolded child. That night I understood that I had lost my son somewhere along the way, that Heather had built a wall between us brick by brick, and I had been too proud or too blind to fight back. The attacks on my competence became more frequent after that. During board meetings, David would question my decisions in front of our investors. Are you sure about this contract, Dad? It seems risky for someone your age to take on such a complex deal. The words came out of his mouth, but I could hear Heather's voice behind them, her coaching, her systematic destruction of my authority. She convinced him that I was becoming forgetful, that my judgment was slipping. When I forgot his birthday one year, the first time in 42 years, she made sure everyone knew about it. Never mind that I had been negotiating a $15 million merger that week, that I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in 2 weeks. All that mattered was that the great Michael Whitmore had forgotten his son's birthday. Maybe you should see a doctor, David suggested after Heather's campaign of whispers and meaningful looks, just to make sure everything's okay up there. He tapped his temple, and I saw Heather's satisfied smile from across the room. The irony was, that I had never been more mentally sharp. Every insult, every slight, every moment of disrespect was catalogued in my mind with perfect clarity. I remembered the exact date when David stopped calling me Dad in business meetings, switching to Michael as if we were colleagues instead of father and son. I remembered the way Heather's eyes lit up whenever she successfully drove a wedge between us. I remembered it all. But the worst part wasn't Heather's cruelty or even David's weakness. The worst part was the loneliness. Margaret and I used to talk about everything. Business decisions, family problems, dreams for the future. After she died, I thought David might fill some of that void, that we might grow closer as adults. Instead, I found myself eating dinner alone most nights, calling my son to get his voicemail, watching him choose his wife's version of reality over his father's truth. 6 months ago, things reached a breaking point. Heather convinced David that I was hoarding control of the company, that I was being selfish by not stepping down. "He's holding you back," I heard her tell him during one of their arguments that echoed through our family office walls. "You'll never be your own man as long as he's breathing down your neck." That's when I realized Heather wasn't just trying to push me out of David's life. She was positioning herself to inherit everything I had built. The company, the money, the respect I had earned over 35 years of blood, sweat, and 18-hour days. She saw an old man whose wife had died, whose son could be manipulated, whose legacy could be stolen with enough patience and cruelty. But Heather had made one crucial mistake. She underestimated me. While she was busy convincing David that I was losing my mind, I was documenting every conversation, every financial irregularity, every lie she told. I hired investigators, reviewed bank statements, and discovered things that would have made Margaret sick to her stomach. The woman my son had married wasn't just cruel, she was calculating in ways that went far beyond family dysfunction. Now, watching David's hands shake as he reached for the envelope, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of being 10 steps ahead of someone who thought they were playing me for a fool. "Go ahead, son," I said quietly. "Open it. It's time you knew exactly who you married." David's fingers trembled as he broke the seal on the manila envelope. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed restaurant, like paper tearing through the fabric of our family's carefully constructed lies. Heather had sobered up remarkably fast, her wine-flushed face now pale as she watched her husband pull out a thick stack of photographs. The first image landed face up on the white tablecloth between the roses and the half-eaten dinner plates. Even upside down, I could see what it showed. Heather walking hand in hand with a man who definitely wasn't my son, entering the lobby of the Grand Hyatt downtown. The timestamp in the corner read, March 15th, 2023, a Tuesday afternoon when she had told David she was getting her hair done. "What is this?" David's voice cracked like a teenager's. He flipped through more photos, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Heather at the same hotel 3 weeks later with the same man. Heather kissing him in the parking garage of Meridian Towers. Heather in his car, her hand on his thigh, laughing at something he was saying. "Dad, what—" David looked up at me, confusion and the first flickers of understanding warring in his eyes. "Where did you get these?" "Keep looking," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "There's more." Heather finally found her voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "Those could be anyone. You can fake photos these days, everyone knows that." But even as she said it, her hand was moving toward the stack of images, trying to flip them over, trying to hide what couldn't be hidden. David caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her. I'd never seen him stand up to her before, not once in 8 years of marriage. The next photograph showed Heather and her mystery man entering room 704 at the Hyatt. The hotel's security footage timestamp showed they stayed for 3 hours and 17 minutes. I had copies of 17 different occasions, spanning from January to just last week. Each visit charged to our company credit card under client entertainment expenses. "His name is Marcus Webb," I said, pulling out a separate folder from my jacket. 34 years old, divorced, works in commercial real estate. He drives a black BMW that Heather bought him last Christmas with money from our joint account. $12,400, charged as a business consultation fee. David's face had gone completely white. He stared at the photos like they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating if he looked hard enough. "Heather," he whispered, "please tell me this isn't real." She straightened in her chair and I watched her make a calculation behind those cold blue eyes. Deny everything or attack me for invading her privacy. She chose attack. "You hired someone to follow me?" Her voice rose, drawing stares from nearby tables. What kind of sick old man spies on his own family? "The kind whose daughter-in-law has been stealing from him for 2 years, I replied calmly, pulling out another set of documents. "Would you like to explain the Marcus Webb consulting invoices? 23 payments totaling $87,600, all approved with your signature on my behalf?" David grabbed the invoices, scanning the familiar letterhead of Whitmore Industries. His face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, recognition, and finally devastating comprehension. "You signed Dad's name to these?" "I have signing authority," Heather said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "For company expenses under $10,000, these were legitimate business costs." "Business costs for what?" David's voice was getting louder, attracting more attention. "What services did this Marcus Webb provide to our company?" I leaned forward, enjoying the moment I had been planning for months. According to the invoices, Mr. Webb provided strategic consulting for market expansion initiatives. Funny thing is, when my investigators contacted him, he had no idea what Whitmore Industries even does. He thought the money was coming from Heather's personal account. The silence that followed was deafening. Heather opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. David stared at the papers in his hands as if they were written in a foreign language. "You told him the money was yours," David said slowly, piecing it together. "You stole from Dad's company to pay your boyfriend, and you told him you were rich." "It's not stealing," Heather snapped, but the fight was going out of her voice. "I work for that company, too. I deserve compensation for all the social events I've attended, all the client dinners I've hosted." "You attend parties and eat free food," I said. "That's not work, that's being married to the vice president of my company." David was still flipping through the photographs, and I watched his world crumble with each image. Heather laughing with another man while David worked 60-hour weeks to prove himself worthy of running the family business. Heather in restaurants I recognized, expensive places David had taken her for anniversaries and birthdays, but this time with her lover. The same jewelry David had bought her for Christmas, sparkling on her neck as she kissed someone else. "How long?" David's voice was barely audible. "How long what?" Heather was still trying to play dumb, but she was cornered now, and we all knew it. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" She looked around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. The truth sat on the table between us in glossy color prints, time-stamped and documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. "David, you don't understand." "How long?" His voice cracked like a whip. 2 years, she whispered. "But it doesn't mean anything, it's just, you're always working and I was lonely and—" David threw the photos down so hard the wine glasses jumped. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, staining it like blood. 2 years? Our entire marriage? You've been cheating on me for half of our entire marriage? It's not what you think, Heather said, tears starting to flow, but they looked calculated to me, performed rather than felt. Marcus means nothing to me. You're my husband. You're the one I love. Love? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just humiliated my father on his birthday, called him pathetic, and said you understood why my mother left him. That's your idea of love? I watched my son find his spine for the first time in 8 years, and despite the circumstances, I felt a surge of pride. Maybe there was hope for him after all. But I wasn't done. Not even close. David, I said quietly, you should look at the last document in the envelope, the one underneath all the photographs. His hands were shaking as he reached for the final paper, but I could see the steel growing in his eyes. The weak, manipulated man Heather had married was finally waking up. and she was starting to realize that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse completely. The last document would finish what the photographs had started, and after tonight nothing would ever be the same again. David's hands shook as he unfolded the last document from the envelope. I watched his eyes scan the page, moving left to right, then stopping abruptly. His face went from pale to gray, and for a moment I thought he might be sick right there at the table. "What is it?" Heather's voice was sharp with panic now, all pretense of innocence abandoned. She tried to lean over to see the document, but David pulled it away from her like she was contaminated. "It's a bank statement," David said, his voice hollow, "for an account I didn't know existed." He looked up at me, confusion mixing with growing horror. "An account with my name on it." I nodded grimly. "Keep reading, son. Look at the deposits." David's finger traced down the column of transactions, and I could see the exact moment when the full scope of Heather's betrayal hit him. His breathing stopped completely for several seconds. $123,000, he whispered, "from Whitmore Industries, all transferred in the last 18 months. His voice got stronger, angrier. "What the hell is this, Heather?" She was crying now, but still trying to maintain some shred of control. "I can explain. I opened that account for us, for our future. I was saving money." Saving whose money? David's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "This says the account was opened with just my name, my social security number, my signature." He held up the signature card that was attached to the statement. "Except, I never signed this." I had suspected Heather was stealing, but when my forensic accountant showed me the extent of her theft, even I had been shocked. The Marcus Webb consulting fees were just the tip of the iceberg. She had been systematically draining money from Whitmore Industries for almost 2 years, using David's identity and forged authorizations to cover her tracks. "The handwriting analysis confirms it," I said, pulling out another folder. "Heather has been practicing your signature, David. She's got it down to an art form. She opened that account 6 months after your last promotion, when you got access to larger expense approvals." David stared at the signature card, comparing it to his own handwriting. The forgery was nearly perfect, but under microscopic analysis the differences were clear. Heather had studied his signature like a professional counterfeiter. "You stole from my father's company using my name," David said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they could possibly be true. "You made me an accessory to embezzlement." "It's not embezzlement," Heather protested, but her voice was weak now. "It's a family business. I'm family. I was just taking what we were entitled to." Entitled to. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. "You were entitled to a salary, which you received. You were entitled to benefits, which you received. You were not entitled to steal $123,000 and blame it on my son." But that wasn't even the worst part. I reached for the final folder I had been saving, the one that would destroy whatever sympathy David might still have for his wife. "There's more," I said, watching Heather's face crumple as she realized I wasn't done yet. "Tell me, Heather, what were you planning to do with all that stolen money?" She didn't answer, just stared at the table like she was trying to make herself invisible. "Because according to the withdrawal records, you didn't spend it on yourself. The money left that account in a series of cashier's checks over the past 6 months, all made out to Hartwell and Associates." David frowned. "Who's Hartwell and Associates?" "A divorce law firm," I said, letting the words sink in. "One of the best in the state, actually. They specialize in high-asset divorce cases where one spouse needs to hide money from the other." The color drained from David's face completely. "You've been planning to divorce me?" Heather's tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different than before. Less performance, more genuine panic. "David, please, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," David said, his voice deadly quiet. "You've been stealing from my family's company, having an affair with another man and planning to divorce me once you had enough money hidden away, all while pretending to love me and making me doubt my own father." I pulled out the final document, the one that had taken my breath away when the investigator first showed it to me. "This is the retainer agreement Heather signed with Hartwell and Associates. Look at the date, David." He took the paper with numb fingers. "February 14th, he read aloud. "Valentine's Day. You hired a divorce lawyer on Valentine's Day?" "The same day you gave her that diamond necklace," I added. "The one that cost $8,000. The same day you told her you loved her and wanted to start trying for children." David's hands clenched into fists. "You let me talk about having kids with you while you were planning to leave me?" Heather was sobbing now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" David's voice was rising again, drawing stares from across the restaurant. "That you were a liar and a thief? That our entire marriage was a sham? That you were using me to steal from my father while sleeping with another man?" "I never meant to hurt you," Heather gasped between sobs. "But you did hurt me," David said, and for the first time since Margaret died, I heard strength in my son's voice. Real strength, not the artificial confidence Heather had programmed into him. "You hurt me and you hurt Dad and you tried to destroy our family for money." I leaned back in my chair, watching my son finally see his wife for who she really was. The investigation had cost me $15,000 and 3 months of sleepless nights, but seeing David's eyes clear of Heather's manipulation made every penny worth it. "The account she opened in your name has been frozen," I told David. "The FBI is investigating the forged signatures and the embezzlement charges. Hartwell and Associates has been contacted and they're returning the stolen money to avoid being charged as accessories." Heather looked up sharply. "The FBI? Did you think you could steal over $100,000 from a corporation and there wouldn't be consequences?" I asked. "This isn't family drama anymore, Heather. This is federal crime." David was staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Who have I been married to for 8 years?" That was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Who was the woman who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my son while stealing from the company I had spent 35 years building? Who could look David in the eye every morning, accept his love and trust while planning his betrayal? Now, finally, we were about to find out exactly who Heather really was, because cornered animals show their true nature, and Heather was about to reveal hers. The silence that followed was deafening. Heather sat frozen, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled from running her hands through it in panic. David stared at the documents spread across the table like they were evidence from a crime scene, which in many ways they were. "How long have you known?" Heather's voice was barely a whisper, but the question was directed at me, not David. For the first time all evening, she was looking at me with something approaching respect. Fear, maybe, but also a grudging acknowledgement that she had been outplayed. "I started suspecting something 6 months ago," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage burning in my chest. "When you convinced David to question the Henderson contract in front of our biggest investors, you knew just enough about our business to cause maximum damage, but not enough to hide your ignorance from someone who's been doing this for 35 years. David looked up sharply. "The Henderson contract? That was my idea." "No, son, it wasn't. The questions you asked, the concerns you raised, they were too specific, too targeted. Someone had been coaching you, feeding you information designed to make me look incompetent." I turned to face Heather directly. "You were setting the stage to have me declared unfit to run my own company, weren't you?" Heather's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the calculating woman beneath the tears. "You are unfit. You're 70 years old, Michael. You should have retired years ago." "Maybe," I said, "but that should have been my decision to make, not yours to manipulate." David was processing everything with the slow horror of someone watching a building collapse in slow motion. "You were trying to force Dad out of the company?" "I was trying to secure our future," Heather snapped, her mask slipping further. "Your father is holding you back, David. He'll never let you be your own man as long as he's alive." "As long as I'm alive?" I repeated the words carefully. "That's an interesting choice of phrase, Heather." She realized her mistake immediately, her face flushing red. That's not what I meant. But I had heard what I needed to hear. I pulled out one final folder, the one I had hoped I wouldn't need to use. Tell me, what did you and Marcus Webb discuss during your meeting at Starbucks on October 3rd? Heather went completely still. How could you possibly know? Because I had someone listening, I said simply. The same investigator who took the photographs. He's very good at his job. I opened the folder and pulled out a transcript, several pages long. Would you like me to read this aloud, or would you prefer to explain to David what you meant when you told your boyfriend that you were tired of waiting for the old man to die naturally? The words hit David like a physical blow. He actually recoiled from his wife, pushing his chair back from the table. What did you just say? It gets worse, I continued, scanning the transcript. Here's another interesting quote. If something happened to Michael, David would inherit everything, and then it would be easy to get control. He does whatever I tell him to do. David's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. Heather, please tell me you didn't say that. She was trapped now, and she knew it. The tears had stopped, replaced by something colder, more calculating. This was the real Heather, the one who had been hiding behind sweet smiles and loving wife performances for 8 years. You recorded private conversations? She said, trying to shift the blame. That's illegal. Actually, it's not, I replied. Texas is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation agrees to the recording, it's perfectly legal, and Marcus Webb was very cooperative once he learned that the woman he'd been sleeping with was married and stealing money to pay for his lifestyle. David stood up so abruptly his chair toppled backward. You talked about Dad dying? You talked about him dying with your boyfriend? It wasn't like that, Heather protested, but her voice lacked conviction. People say things when they're frustrated. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything, David said, his voice shaking with rage. It means you've been planning this from the beginning. The manipulation, the stealing, the affair, it was all part of some sick plan to get your hands on our money. I reached across the table and placed my hand over David's. Son, there's one more thing you need to know. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. What else could there possibly be? The life insurance policy on me that was changed 6 months ago, the one where the beneficiary was switched from you to both you and Heather with rights of survivorship, meaning if something happened to you after I died, she would inherit everything. David's face went white. I never agreed to change any life insurance policy. No, you didn't. But your wife forged your signature on that document too. I pulled out the insurance papers, another example of Heather's careful forgery work. She's been planning for every contingency, David. My death, your death, the dissolution of our family business, she had a plan for all of it. Heather finally snapped. You think you're so smart, don't you? She snarled, her voice turning venomous. You think you've won? David will never forgive you for destroying his marriage. He'll hate you for this. Maybe, I said calmly. But he'll be alive to hate me, and that's more than I could say if your plans had succeeded. David was staring at his wife like she was a stranger. Were you planning to kill me too? Don't be ridiculous, Heather said, but the denial came too quickly, too rehearsed. Because according to this transcript, I continued, you told Marcus that David's death would have to look accidental. You mentioned that he's been working too hard, drinking more lately, that it wouldn't be surprising if he had a heart attack or a car accident. The restaurant around us had gone completely quiet. Even the staff had stopped moving, sensing the drama unfolding at our table. I could see other diners whispering among themselves, probably wondering if they should call the police. David sat down heavily, his head in his hands. 8 years, he whispered. 8 years of marriage, and it was all a lie. Not all of it, Heather said, reaching for him, but he jerked away from her touch. David, please, you have to believe me. I love you. You love my money, David said, looking up at her with clear eyes for the first time in years. You love what I can give you. But you don't love me, because you can't plan someone's death and claim to love them. I felt a surge of pride, watching my son finally stand up for himself, finally see through the web of lies and manipulations that had controlled him for so long. He was finding his strength, discovering the man he could have been all along if Heather hadn't been systematically destroying his confidence and his relationship with me. "What happens now?" David asked, looking between Heather and me. "Now," I said, standing up and straightening my jacket, "we call the police, and then we start rebuilding what she tried to destroy." Heather made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You can't prove any of this in court. Recordings, photographs, handwriting analysis, none of it will stick. I'll hire better lawyers than you can afford." I smiled for the first time all evening. "Actually, Heather, you won't be hiring anyone. Because the money you stole, it's evidence in a federal investigation now. It's frozen along with all your other accounts. And Marcus Webb, he's already agreed to testify against you in exchange for immunity." The fight went out of her completely. She slumped in her chair, finally understanding that her carefully constructed plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. She had lost everything: her marriage, her money, her freedom, and most importantly, her control over the family she had tried to destroy. As I watched David pull out his phone to call the authorities, I realized that tonight had been about more than exposing Heather's crimes. It had been about reclaiming my family, my dignity, and my legacy from someone who thought she could take it all away from a grieving old man. She had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated just how much fight this old man still had in him. 6 months later, I stood in my office overlooking the city skyline, watching the morning sun paint the glass towers gold. The newspaper on my desk carried a small item on page 6. "Local woman sentenced to 5 years for corporate embezzlement." No mention of the attempted murder conspiracy charges. Those had been pled down in exchange for Heather's full cooperation with the FBI's investigation into similar fraud schemes. David knocked on my office door, something he hadn't done in years. During Heather's reign of manipulation, he would simply barge in, demanding explanations or challenging decisions she had coached him to question. Now he waited for permission, respectful in a way that reminded me of the boy he used to be. "Come in, son." He entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder that looked much less ominous than the one I had brought to my birthday dinner. His face had color again, the gray exhaustion of living with a predator replaced by something healthier, more alive. "The Henderson contract came through," he said, setting one of the coffee cups on my desk. "Final signatures yesterday. $23 million over 3 years. I nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "And the Morrison account?" "Renewed for another 5 years. They said they were impressed with our new stability and family unity." David smiled grimly. "Apparently, our reputation took a hit when I was questioning your decisions in board meetings. Word gets around in this industry." That didn't surprise me. Corporate espionage isn't just about stealing trade secrets, it's about undermining confidence, creating doubt about leadership competence. Heather had been more effective than she knew in damaging Whitmore Industries' reputation, and it had taken months of careful relationship rebuilding to restore our clients' trust. "What about you?" I asked, studying my son's face. "How are you holding up?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. "Some days are harder than others. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times she manipulated me into hurting you." He shook his head. "I was such a fool, Dad." "No," I said firmly. "You were a man in love with someone who exploited that love. There's a difference between being a fool and being a victim." He looked up at me with surprised gratitude. We had been having conversations like this for months now, slowly rebuilding the trust and respect that Heather had systematically destroyed. It wasn't easy. 8 years of manipulation don't disappear overnight. But we were making progress. "I brought you something," David said, opening the folder he had carried in. "The final divorce decree came through yesterday." I took the papers, scanning the legal language that officially ended David's marriage to the woman who had tried to destroy our family. "How do you feel about it being final?" "Relieved," he said without hesitation. "I thought I would feel sad or angry or something more dramatic, but mostly I just feel free. Free." It was a word I had been thinking about a lot lately. Free from Heather's poison, free from the constant tension of family dinners, free from watching my son transform into someone I didn't recognize. Free from the fear that I might lose everything I had built to someone who saw my life's work as nothing more than a source of money. "There's something else," David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I've been thinking about the company's succession plan." My chest tightened slightly. This was the conversation I had been both anticipating and dreading. The announcement I had planned to make at my 70th birthday dinner, naming David as the next CEO of Whitmore Industries, had been derailed by Heather's public humiliation. We hadn't discussed it since. "I don't think I'm ready," David said quietly. "Not yet." I set down my coffee cup, surprised by my own relief. "What makes you say that?" 8 years, Dad. For 8 years, I made decisions based on what Heather wanted instead of what was right for the company. I questioned your judgment, undermined your authority, and nearly destroyed everything you built. He met my eyes directly. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not being manipulated by someone else. It was the most mature thing I had heard him say since before his marriage. The David sitting across from me now was thoughtful, self-aware, honest about his limitations. He was becoming the kind of man who might actually be worthy of inheriting a company built on integrity and hard work. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "Give me 2 years. Let me prove that I can make decisions based on what's best for Whitmore Industries, not what someone else wants me to do. Let me rebuild the relationships I damaged with our clients and our employees." He paused. "Let me earn the right to be your successor instead of just inheriting it because I'm your son." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man my son was becoming. 2 years ago, he never would have had this kind of insight into his own character. Heather's manipulation had been so complete that he had lost the ability to think independently. Watching him reclaim his judgment, his integrity, his sense of self, had been like watching someone recover from a serious illness. "All right," I said. 2 years. His relief was visible. "Thank you, Dad. I won't let you down." "You already haven't," I told him. "The fact that you recognize you're not ready yet proves you're becoming ready." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee and watching the city wake up below us. It reminded me of mornings when David was young, before Heather, before Margaret's death, when our family was whole and uncomplicated. "Dad?" David's voice was hesitant. "Yes?" "I'm sorry for everything. For choosing her over you, for doubting you, for making you feel like a stranger in your own family." His voice cracked slightly. "You tried to warn me about her, and I wouldn't listen." I reached across the desk and placed my hand over his, the way I used to when he was a boy who had scraped his knee or had a nightmare. "You don't need to apologize for being human, son. Heather was very good at what she did. She studied you, learned your weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. That doesn't make you weak. It makes her dangerous." "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you figure out what she was really doing?" I smiled, thinking back to that first moment when something had felt wrong. "Your mother always said I had good instincts about people. After she died, I stopped trusting those instincts because I was too focused on not losing you too. But eventually the evidence became impossible to ignore." "What evidence?" "You stopped laughing," I said simply. "For 8 years I watched you become more serious, more stressed, more isolated from everyone except Heather. She convinced you that success meant constant worry, that leadership meant questioning everything, that love meant choosing sides. But real success, real leadership, real love, they should make you stronger, not weaker." David nodded slowly. "She did make me feel weak. Like I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of inheriting the company unless I proved myself by standing up to you." "And now?" He smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. "Now I feel like I might actually be worth something again." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or victory. Heather was in prison, her schemes had been exposed, her power over our family destroyed. But that wasn't what made me feel successful. What mattered was sitting across from me, my son, finally free to become the man he was meant to be. The phone on my desk buzzed with an incoming call from our biggest client, probably wanting to discuss the expansion project we had been planning. David stood to leave, but I gestured for him to stay. "Whitmore Industries, this is Michael," I answered, watching David settle back into his chair. "And David," my son added, leaning toward the speakerphone. For the first time in 8 years, we were partners again. Not perfect, not without work still to do, but partners nonetheless. And as we discussed business strategies and growth projections with our client, I realized that Heather's greatest crime hadn't been the stealing or the lying or even the attempted manipulation of my death. Her greatest crime had been trying to take away the future I had spent 35 years building, not just the company, but the relationship with my son that would outlast any business, any money, any legacy. She had failed at that completely, and in failing she had given me something I thought I had lost forever, the chance to watch David become the kind of man his mother would have been proud of. That was worth more than all the money she had tried to steal.
Welcome to the Story Channel. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few notes. The content in this video uses AI-generated images and voice narration, combined with the channel's creative editing. Everything is intended solely for entertainment purposes and does not depict or reflect any real events or real people. Hope you enjoy the story and have a great time watching.